now.
Thank you. I do also, speaking of questions, there is no such thing as a stupid question. If you're confused about something, please ask. I have a tendency to speak kind of quickly. It is a bad habit. I am working on it. But I do seriously encourage questions, because this is like almost a year and a half worth of Latin studies compressed into about an hour and a half, an hour if I go speedy. But yes, let's not harass or bully anyone. That's not fun. That is not in the spirit of what we do in the SCA. We want to encourage people here, not make them sad. But welcome to my Introduction to Latin course. I am Fortunata. I come from the East Kingdom in the Barony of Carolingia, which is the greater Boston area, and I do a lot of Latin. I think those of you, most of whom are here, heard that I have a degree in classical studies. I have been studying Latin for about 20 years. It is a very important language to me, and I really enjoy it. So that is where do you get off teaching this class, Fortunata? There it is. And just a thing to note, and we sort of covered this a little bit already, but Latin's use as a language spans more than 1,000 years, from before the Common Era well into almost to the end of our period in the SCA, and it like I said, it does change over that time. The Latin is super intelligible to someone familiar with classical Latin. There are, as I said, some changes in spelling, pronunciation, and grammar. They are relatively minor. Because I am a classicist, we'll be focusing on classical Latin as it was used before the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which is, as we say, the OG Latin. And so the first thing to talk about is pronunciation. Latin, of course, uses the Latin alphabet in the same way that English does. But unlike English, where that has multiple sounds for each letter, or each written letter can produce multiple sounds in speaking, Latin doesn't. On the left-hand side here, we have our vowels. A will always say ah, like in father. E will always say eh, like in bed. The letter I will always say e, like in wheel. O will always say its name, like in tote. U will always say oo, like in tune. And then we have two diphthongs, which are two vowels mushed together to create one sound. The most common diphthong you see in classical Latin is the AE diphthong, which says I, like in sky. My persona's nomen is Aelia Fortunata. That AE will always say I. Sometimes when you read modern transcriptions of Latin, you may see an umlaut or diaeresis over a vowel, and that is the indication that you do not turn those two vowels into a diphthong. They should be read separately. Occasionally, also you see the diphthong OE, which often says oi, like in toy. The first word I always think of when I think of the OE diphthong is the word for battle, proilium. Which always, so OE often says oi. Then we come to our consonants. As I said, they all contain one sound, one letter for one sound. It's a one-to-one thing. So C is always going to be hard like cat and never hard like circle. The CH sound ch doesn't exist in Latin. You almost certainly won't see it, and if you do, pronounce it as you would a C, k. Your letter G is always going to be hard like gas, never hard like, or never soft like giraffe or Germany. In fact, the Latin word for Germany is Germania, not Germania. Germania, hard G. Unlike Spanish or French, you always pronounce the letter H, so if you see it, make a H. The letter J, so that sound that we associate with J in English, ja, doesn't exist in Latin. The letter itself, technically speaking, doesn't exist in Latin either. What it is, what the letter J is an indication of the consonantal I. The letter I can sometimes act as a consonant rather than a vowel, in which case you might, in some more contemporary transcriptions, see the letter J used. For example, in English, we say justice, but in Latin, that word from which justice is derived is actually justicia, I-U. So if you ever see a J, pretend it's an I. The PH sound you can pronounce like in English. It's not actually what it's meant to be. It's meant to be an approximation of the Greek, what we would say, the letter that we would call in English phi, but is actually P. It's a hard aspiration, but if you want to pronounce a PH like you do in English, that's okay. No classicist will give you a side eye. The SH sound sh also doesn't exist in Latin. You won't see it. And then TH, that th sound like the, those there, doesn't exist. You can safely ignore the H and pronounce it as a hard T. And then we come to V and W. W as a letter doesn't exist in Latin. The letter V you will see fairly often. You can sometimes see it written as U because V and U are the same letter in Latin. They say, oh. So we see that U always says oo like in tune, but if you think about it, words. I'll use the word for goodbye, which is wale, or most people are familiar with the very famous phrase, I came, I saw, I conquered, veni, vidi, vici. Think about if those words were written with a U at the beginning, and it's actually the same sound, veni, vidi, vici. Pronounce a V like the letter U or W.
Somebody had a question about the C in Anno Societatis.
Mm-hmm.
Being hard.
Yep, so that would be Anno Societatis. And I think that's actually one of the, I have a pronunciation exercise in the next, yeah, I have it in the next slide. Look at you getting ahead of me. So yeah, that last letter is going to be the letter Y. You basically only find it in words of Greek origin, where it is an approximation of upsilon. In most cases in Latin, if you see a Y, you can treat it as if it was the letter I. I'll show you an example of that just now. So we have these words, some of which might be quite familiar to you, some of which may not, but these are all good examples of how Latin pronunciation differs from English. I'm sure we are largely familiar with that famed general Gaius Julius Caesar. That's how we would say it in English. In Latin, it'd be Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar, incidentally, is also where you get the German word Kaiser and the Russian word Tsar. Fun fact of the day, Gaius Julius Caesar. And we have the next word, kithara or kitara. Kitara is a string instrument, also ultimately where we derive the word from words guitar and zither. Kitara. It's a word of Greek origin, so you see that Y in there. I already mentioned at least veni, vidi, vici. Veni, vidi, vici. Let the buyer beware. Caveat emptor. A similar word, beware of dog. Cave canem. And you guys know Anno Societatis. I know in English we often say Anno Societatis, but in Latin that C is going to be hard. Societatis. Hail and farewell. Ave atque vale. One of the many mottos of the United States, out of many one, e pluribus unum. We have the word for sky, caelum, is where we get, ultimately where we get words like celestial, caelum, sky. And then an epithet of the god Apollo, Phoebus, or Poebus technically, but Phoebus is fine to say. the masculine form of Phoebe, because why not? Many fun facts. So yes, Gaius Julius Caesar, Kitara, veni, vidi, vici, caveat emptor, cave canem, anno societatis, ave atque vale, e pluribus unum, caelum, foibus. And these are just some examples for getting used to Latin phonology. Latin is extremely regular in that sense. You don't necessarily find things like right, tight, caught, et cetera, that we do in English. So there's that. I say, okay, cool. We understand how to pronounce it, but what is Latin? Latin is a heavily inflected language. Okay, inflection, what does that mean, Fortunata? What is an inflected language? Inflection in this case is a language wherein the spelling and form of words change depending on their use in a sentence. And Latin has this to a great degree. English has by and large lost almost all of its inflection. Say, okay, so the words change depending on how they're used. What does that mean for word order? Latin word order or syntax can best be described as the rules are made up and the points don't matter. It doesn't really use word order the way we do in English, which is very confusing for a lot of people because even in many contemporary languages like Spanish or German or French, there is still a word order involved. We don't have that in Latin, and let's look at that a little bit. We'll see some examples. In English, our word order is subject, verb, object. We can say, I gave him the book. This is a grammatically correct sentence. I am the subject because I'm the one doing the action. The verb, gave, I'm the one doing it. I'm still the subject. Gave is the verb, and then the object is the book because the book is the recipient of it, is being acted upon rather. So we have our subject, our verb, and our object. And you can use Yoda speak and say, the book to him gave I. And largely we understand what this means. It's intelligible, but it is a grammatically incorrect sentence because it's object, verb, subject. However, in Latin, we have wibbly wobbly word order because you can use all of these. Donavi librum e donavi, or e donavi librum. These are all grammatically correct sentences, and they all mean the same thing. I gave him the book. How does that work? You'll notice that from between each example, the words are the same. They're just in a different order. It is the endings of the words that tell us where in the sentence they belong. It ends up making sense, I promise, once I explain the why of it. But just know Latin word order is wibbly wobbly. You can sort of fling things many places. There's a joke amongst many classicists, people who study classical Latin, when reading Cicero, where you say, if Cicero doesn't get to the verb before the end of the page, I'm going to scream. Because the word order doesn't much matter. It allows for a great range of clauses within clauses within clauses, because you can put the main verb way at the end or way at the beginning or somewhere stuck in the middle, and make all sorts of interesting emphasis or non-emphasis, as the case may be, because of that. Let's start with some nouns: people, places, things, and ideas. Nouns and technically speaking also adjectives, but we're not actually going to cover adjectives. We have three major characteristics that we have to pay attention to when we learn about Latin nouns. That first characteristic is the case. It's how the noun is used in a sentence. If you think of, imagine like a little Lego guy. And if you put a fireman's hat on it. The Lego guy is now a firefighter. If you put a little crown on it, now they're a monarch. If you put a little bubble on it, now it's an astronaut. Cases are how the noun is being used in the sentence. There's these little hats that tell you what role the Lego man noun is playing. You have the noun's number. Is it singular or plural? Is it one cat or many cats? Singular, plural, number. Latin nouns also have something called gender. This is grammatical gender. It is not linked to gender identity. Grammatical gender is largely arbitrary. Other languages, Spanish and French, most Romance languages have grammatical gender. English doesn't really, which is interesting because German does. In Latin, we have 3 grammatical genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. All you really need to know about grammatical gender in Latin is that it's used in linking up. And again, because we don't have word order, it allows you to figure out which adjectives are modifying which nouns. And we have a little example here. We have 3 vaguely related words. We have terminus, via, and iter. These are border or boundary, way or road, and journey. And you can see sort of vaguely similar. Terminus is a word with the grammatical gender of masculine. Via is a noun with the grammatical gender of feminine, and iter has the grammatical gender of neuter. And if we want to modify any of these nouns, if we want to put an adjective with it, we can use the same adjective, which will also have examples of different grammatical genders. So you have to have the masculine form of the adjective to modify a masculine noun, the feminine form of an adjective to modify a feminine noun, the neuter form of an adjective to modify a neuter noun. That's really the most important thing to know about grammatical gender. Otherwise, doesn't much matter. Say, okay, we have these 3 major characteristics. Still not so sure about cases. Cases are, like I said, what role the noun is playing in a sentence. For the subject of a sentence, you're going to use the nominative case, which is largely translated as a, an, or the noun. You'll see that it's translated that way, but there's nothing necessarily in the word itself there will not be a secondary word for that article. Latin doesn't use, or classical Latin at least, doesn't use articles. They are wholly contextual, so it is up to you as the translator to figure out, are we talking about a specific cat or cats in general, a cat or the cat. I'm going to keep using cats because I like cats, and mine is napping over there and looking very handsome. So the nominative case is for the subject, the person, thing, idea, what have you, doing the action of the noun. You have the genitive case, which indicates possession. You can translate it as of the noun or noun apostrophe s. You have the dative case, which is translated as to or for the noun. This is the indirect object, where the direct object is the thing being acted upon. The indirect object is the recipient of the thing being verbed. So when you say, I gave him the book is going to be our direct object because it's directly being acted upon. It is being given, whereas to him is going to be our indirect object because it is the recipient of the verb. It is the recipient of the book being given. So you can see that the accusative case, we also translate as a, an, or the. I gave him the book. Then you have the ablative case, which is used for a whole lot of purposes, up to and including accompaniment, instrumentation, and a whole bunch of prepositional phrases. We usually translate the ablative case as by, with, or from. I went with you to the store. I am, so that's an accompaniment, that's an active accompaniment. Or I killed him with a sword. With a sword is instrumentation. That is the instrument that I use to do the thing. So we have these 5 basic cases. There are actually a couple of more. Their use is much less and much farther between, so I don't include them in my introductory class. So you have these 5 basic cases to worry about: the subject, possession, indirect and direct object, and a whole bunch of other things. So the nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative. Say, oh, okay, cool. But you said the words change depending on how they're used in the sentence. How does that work? That's when we have this neat thing called declension. All nouns in Latin belong to one of 5 groupings called declensions. They are simply numbered first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And all nouns, including neologisms, words that are made up, as long as they're used in Latin, they are going to fall into one of these 5 declensions. The declensions are such that each has a different pattern of case endings that are very regular. So 2 first declension nouns are always going to share the same case endings depending on where they're used in a sentence. So the 2 nominative case endings will be the same. The genitive case endings will be the same. They might differ between a first declension and second declension noun because those 2 follow different patterns. They're in different groupings. And declensions are why the plural of cactus is cacti, the plural of alumna is alumni, with that AE diphthong, and why the plural of apparatus is, surprise, apparatus. These 3 words, as examples, fall into 3 different declensions, and so therefore their case endings in the plural are going to be different because they're basically different families. And just a word of notice, understanding, a lot of dictionary definitions won't actually tell you what declension a noun is. You'll look and it will not say first declension or fifth declension. What they do instead is a dictionary definition will give you the singular nominative case ending and the genitive singular case ending. So they'll give you the first 2 case endings, and from those 2, with time and practice and understanding, it is immediately evident which declension a word belongs to. And it becomes immediately evident with practice. I don't expect anyone to remember which one goes with which. Comes with practice. But here's this sort of example. We have our 5 declensions down here. First declension, second, third, fourth, and fifth, with the nominative and genitive case endings. For a first declension noun like alumna, the nominative case ending is going to be a. There we have alumna. The genitive case ending is going to be that AE diphthong. Yes, it's also the plural, more on that in a second. But to say the female, or to say the alumna or of the alumna in Latin will be alumni. Whereas for the second declension has 3 possible nominative case endings, but it's always going to have that same genitive case ending. So the of the whatever is always going to end with I. So like the word for boy is puer, P-U-E-R. Of the boy is always going to be pueri. And that's going to be the same whether or not, so cactus is, again, it's a second declension noun. So one cactus by itself, chilling, being the subject, is going to be cactus. Of the cactus will be cacti. That genitive case ending is always the same. I'm going to skip the third declension for a second. And the pattern continues with the fourth declension and fifth declension. Apparatus is a fourth declension noun, so apparatus of the apparatus will also be apparatus. It's a little confusing. The fourth and fifth declensions tend to be the less common. Third declension doesn't have a paradigm nominative case ending. What does that mean? It means that any word that you try to translate into Latin that doesn't end in a, us, r, u, or es can safely be declined as a third declension noun. I do a lot of work with scroll translations into Latin for the East Kingdom scribes, and like 8 times out of 10, if I have to translate a name, it's going to be a third declension noun, because something like Wilhelm is going to most easily become a third declension. It doesn't fall into any of those other paradigm patterns. I realize that's kind of confusing. I apologize. And so now we'll, rather than continuing to babble, I'll just show you what I mean when I say that dictionary definitions don't give you, give you the question. Yes, question. I see a hand raised.
Just trying to wrap my head around the previous slide. So
yes,
as a herald, and we talk about names, especially Roman names that are or names that are Latinized.
Yep.
And they say, oh, that's the nominative form of that name. It should be the genitive in this sentence, but if they're going to register it, it should be the nominative.
Exactly.
Can you explain to me why that is? Is the nominative just like who it or what the noun is without any? Is there a trick to understanding the difference?
So the nominative case, like I said, it's used for the subject. So what we would think of as sort of, I guess you can more or less think of it as like the base form,
Right.
Because declension will come off of that. The first form you learn, the first case form you learn for any noun is going to be the nominative. That's largely what's going to be used if you're talking to someone or about someone if they are the subject of the sentence.
And it would be what we register for that person too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make a little more sense?
Yes, the nominative is what we register. It could be spelled differently if it's in a genitive form in a sentence about something going on with that person. But the nominative is what I need to focus on for names.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. See, we have here a lovely dictionary entry for the word magistra. Some people may already be familiar with this word because it is often used now for oftentimes for laurels and pelicans who don't want to necessarily use the word mistress because that can be kind of squiggly. By and large, it means teacher. Like when I was taking Latin in high school, our Latin teachers were magistra so-and-so. But you see here we have that nominative case ending, that nominative form of the word magistra, and we have this AE after it. That's going to be the genitive case ending, so magistri. But if we go back up to our little chart here, we see that AE genitive case ending magistra is going to be a first declension noun. If it was not a first declension noun, it would have one of these other case endings attached. But so we see magistra, magistri, that tells us it's a first declension noun. The dictionary tells us it has the grammatical gender of feminine, and then some different uses of that word in different contexts. This website is a really fantastic one. It's one of the gold standards in resources for classical education. This is the Perseus Project, which is held and completed through Tufts University. But if you're looking for a Latin text, Perseus probably has it. They also have a bunch of dictionaries. The user interface is not necessarily the best. Can be a little hard to figure out, but if you're looking for a text or trying to translate a word very particularly, or you're not sure your normal dictionary isn't cutting it, the Perseus project is, like I said, it's one of the gold standards. I cannot recommend it enough. But we have our example dictionary definition. We can look at some sort of further examples and see how this all gets put together. On the left, we have a first declension noun, stella, which means star. And then we have our singular and our plural. It's a first declension noun. It has the grammatical gender of feminine. We have stella, the star, stellae, of the star, stellae, to or for the star. The way you can tell the difference between your stellae and stellae will be contextual. So much in, okay, not so much, but being able to tell the difference between certain things, again, it becomes contextual, whether it's supposed to be a genitive or a dative. Stellae, to or for the star. The accusative, stellam. So I named the star. That would be stellam. And then by, with, or from the star, stella. You'll see the little macron or long mark over the A. You hold that sound just a beat longer. It is oftentimes not written, but I figured I should include it just in case. We have our plurals. Stellae, the stars. Stellarum, of the stars. Stellis, to or for the stars. Stellas, the stars. And stellis, by, with, or from the stars. On the right-hand side, we have a third declension noun, sol, the sun. As I said, that third declension nouns don't have a paradigm nominative case ending. So we could say sol, the sun. Solis, soli, solem, sole, of the sun, to or for the sun, by, with, or from the sun. And then soles, the suns, solium, of the suns, S-U-N-S, solibus, soles, solibus. Oh, thank you for popping the Perseus thing in there. So you can see sort of these patterns that emerge with these different words. So if you're looking at a sentence and you see sole, say, okay, by, with, or for the sun, and you can sort of then look at the other nouns and slot in where they're supposed to go in the sentence. So that's how your case endings in Latin will start to dictate your word order in English. And I will give further examples of that towards the end where we start putting it all together. Wahahaha. Any questions about nouns?
Why do they call them?
Why do they call them?
These feel like conjugations.
Conjugations are for verbs.
Oh, so that's okay. So, okay. Got you.
No, that's a great question. Like, seriously, that's a fantastic question. But yeah, the way you tell it, a noun is declined, a verb is conjugated. And since we're talking about them, verbs, they're not just what you do. However, in comparison to nouns, verbs have a lot more moving parts. Verbs get complicated, still very regular, but complicated. We have our nouns with our three basic characteristics of case, number, and gender. Verbs have 5 major characteristics. Verbs have the person, who is doing the action or the subject of the verb. Is it me? Is it you? Is it all of them over there? Is it my cat? The person. You have the number. How many people are doing the action? Is it just one person or is it many people? You have the tense. When is the action taking place? Is it happening now? Did it happen already? Will it happen in the future tense? You have mood, which the only like basic way I could find to explain it is the way you indicate the action of the verb. So we're just gonna stick a little pin in mood and come back to it in a second. Then you have the voice, whether the subject is doing or receiving the action. When I was in high school, we talked about the passive voice in my Latin classes before we ever really talked about it in my English classes in formal writing. So when my English teacher was like, the passive voice, don't use it in your formal writing, I was like, you can take the passive voice from my cold dead hands. We talked about it already in Latin. That's the voice. And we'll get back to this. The best way you can tell whether a phrase is passive or active, if you can add by zombies to the end of it and it still makes sense, congratulations, you have a passive phrase there. If it doesn't make sense to add by zombies, then it's an active phrase. So person and number make a lot of sense. Who's doing it? How many people are doing it? But we have tenses, when it's happening, and Latin has a number of different ways to talk about when something is happening. In fact, has 6 tenses. Has the present tense, which you often translate as I am doing it or I do it. It's happening right now. I am teaching a Latin class. You have the future tense. I will be doing it. I was telling my coworkers at work today, oh yeah, I'll be teaching a Latin class after I leave here. The future. You have the perfect tense. I did it with the understanding that that thing is completed, hence why it's perfect. I did it, it's done. I put this class together. I did it. I finished putting it together. Now I'm teaching it. You have the pluperfect tense. I had done it and it's incomplete, repetitive, habitual, or ongoing. I had finished a class on Latin onomastics. It's not done yet, though. I actually don't have one, but I should probably make one. Then you have the imperfect. I was doing it. And a friend of mine pointed out that the imperfect is every student's tense for doing homework. I was doing it, but then I got distracted. And then you have the future perfect. I will have done it. All right, so you're going out for the day, and by the time you get home, I'll have put the dishes away. It'll be done and finished at some point that is not right now. It'll happen at some point in the future. Future perfect tense. So we have our 6 tenses, and then we have our moods, which are not just how we feel, but how we feel is very important. The mood is how you express the action of the verb. We have the indicative, which expresses facts. We are Latin scholars. You're taking this class. Congratulations, you're a Latin scholar now, and that's a fact. You have the imperative, which expresses a command. Be a Latin scholar, do the thing. A command. And then you have the subjunctive, which can express wishes, possibility, or potential. It was suggested that we become Latin scholars. So someone suggested that we might do this thing. We can say, if I were a Latin scholar, I could teach this class. Possibility or potential. So we have our 3 moods. By and large, when you're dealing with like first year Latin, you're almost certainly only going to deal with the indicative and the imperative. You don't start learning about the subjunctive mood until you hit Latin 2, which is usually after your first formal year of Latin. But this is a crash course and I'm giving you as much information as I can. Subjunctives, wishes, possibilities, or potential versus the indicative, which is a fact, it is indicated. And then the imperative is a command. Going back sort of to the list of pronunciation phrases I had before, kawe kanem, beware of dog. That kawe, that's an imperative. It's beware, command. So we have our moods. And as you already asked, do you also decline verbs? No, you conjugate verbs. Latin has 4 conjugations, each with its own patterns for the different characteristics of each verb. And again, much like in nouns, most Latin dictionaries don't list what conjugation the verb belongs to. Instead, an entry will list what are called the verb's 4 principal parts. And it's the second principal part, or the infinitive, the to blank form, that helps you know what conjugation it belongs to, much in the same way that that second form, the genitive form of a noun, tells you what declension it belongs to. And rather than try to keep explaining that, I will illustrate it. We have a dictionary definition here for the verb to love, amo, amare. And the source, I have it here on the bottom, is latin-dictionary.net. I'm sorry if you can hear that rumbling. Someone just drove down our street in a very loud car. Latin-dictionary.net is really cool because it does actually tell you what conjugation or declension a noun or verb belongs to. Many dictionaries don't. So this is really great when you're still trying to sort of puzzle all of those pieces out and you don't want to have to keep referencing. I really like this site. So we have this verb amo. Our first principal part, amo, is the first person, singular, present, active, indicative. We have our 5 characteristics. What does that mean? It means I love. It's a whole lot of information smushed into one 3-letter word. So who is doing it? Me, I. I am one person. I am loving something or someone right now, actively, and that's a fact. We have our second principal part, the infinitive. We usually translate this as to blank, in this case, to love. We have our third principal part, amawi, which is the first person, singular, perfect, active indicative, I loved. And then you have the last, or the fourth principal part, which is the perfect passive participle, having been loved. And with these 4 principal parts, this will eventually give the person who has, a fair amount of experience or practice everything they need to know about this verb. But we know from the first and second principal parts, amo, amare, we know that this is a first conjugation verb. This dictionary entry happens to tell us it's a first conjugation verb. Not all will. And we have some samples to see sort of in practice a little bit how verb conjugation works. On the left-hand side, we have the present active subjunctive table for verb vivo, vivere, vixi, victus, which means to live. The first person, may I live, vivam. The second person, may you live, vivas. The third person singular, vivat. May he, she, or it live. In the plural, the first person plural, vivamus, may we live. Second person plural, vivatis, may y'all live. English really doesn't have a good second person plural word, so we often use y'all. And the third person, may they live, we want. And 2 of these forms may look familiar. I don't know what is commonly said in other parts of the known world. I know here in the East, when we want to cheer for someone or someone's getting an award, we often say vivat or vivant. In classical Latin, this should be vivat or vivant. So I include that there because it's cool and fun. A little bit of interkingdom anthropology. I know people say different things in different parts of the known world. And on the other side, we have that amo verb again, to love. This is the future passive indicative table. So in the future, but the subject is the one who is the recipient of the verb. In the first person, amabor, I will be loved. Second person, amaberis, you will be loved. Amabitor, third person, he, she, or it will be loved. First person plural, amabimur, we will be loved. Second person plural, amabimini, which is just fun to say. That's one of the great things about Latin is you get fun things to say like amabibni. Y'all will be loved, or the third person, they will be loved, amabuntur. We will vivere is a third conjugation verb. Amo, as we have already established, is a first conjugation verb. So you can see we're seeing different patterns here. There are some things which are very similar and there are some things which are not. Like the third person plurals usually have an N in there somewhere towards the end. Amabuntur, we want. And you start to, a lot of people figure out their own mnemonics for it. These are just examples. All right. Any questions about verbs thus far? Euler? Euler? Okay.
I have lots of questions, but
Feel free to throw them at me.
okay, so let's go back to the whole vivat situation.
Sure.
Tell me what you said it meant again.
May he, she, or it live.
So if they're saying it in court, in the English version of saying vivat instead of vivat, they're saying may whoever just got this award live long, or may the kingdom live long, etc.
Yep.
Okay. And the classical is the V is a W. In vulgar, is it still?
Vulgar gets a little bit squiggly. I believe vulgar Latin is really not my wheelhouse. Like my area of focus in college was first century BCE and CE literature. So well outside of the vulgar. I think in vulgar Latin, you do start seeing the V as, or start rather hearing the V as a V.
Okay.
I believe that is one of the changes.
Okay, maybe.
But I can look into that for you and get back to you. So we're friends on Facebook now.
Yes, we are.
So we talked about verbs and nouns and verbs and all of these patterns. Okay, we're starting to get a sense of how it works together. So Romans, go home. No, we don't say Romanis eis dom. No, we don't say that. Instead, what we want is Romani ite domum. Why? Let's break it down. We have the word Romani. It's a second declension, nominative plural. I know it's a second declension noun because I'm familiar with this noun. I know it's plural because I understand this. Romanus, Romani. Romani would be Romans, the subject of the phrase. But what are they doing? They are doing ite. Ite is a plural present active imperative of the verb eo, ire, ii, itos, which means to go. So they're saying, Romans, go somewhere. Okay, where are we going? We're going domum. Domus, I know, is a second declension noun. This is in the singular, and it's an accusative. The technical grammatical word for what domum is doing here is an accusative of place to which. In this case, it is actually just, we're using an accusative verb, or not verb, noun. I've been awake for a while, don't mind me. We're using an accusative to say you should go to, because it is, technically speaking, also the what the verb is acting upon. You're telling us to go somewhere. Where are we going? Home, which is the recipient of that verb. So Romans, go home. Romani ite domum. Okay, that's, we didn't talk a lot about imperatives and things like that. Let's try something a little simpler. Well-known Latin, in principio creavit Deus caelum et terram. This is from the book of Genesis, verse 1, chapter 1. we're actually dealing with Vulgate Latin, which is somewhere in between classical and vulgar. But all of the rules for classical still apply. We have in principio. We know principio is a ablative because this is part of a prepositional phrase. In principio means in the beginning. Principio is a second declension ablative singular. It's an ablative because we're using it in a prepositional phrase. Prepositions like in must go with a noun of a particular case. In this case, in takes the ablative. In the beginning what? In principio creavit. We know from that singular T at the end that this is a third person singular verb. It is perfect, so whatever the verb was doing is complete. It's indicative, therefore factual in terms of grammar. Created. Creo, creare, creavi, creatus means to create. In the beginning, created, but we don't know who the subject is or what the object is. We don't know who is doing the created or what was created. In the beginning, created. In principio creavit Deus. Deus, here we have a nominative case noun. We have a subject. In the beginning, God created. What did God create? We have two nouns here, which are both the object of the verb. We have caelum and terram. Caelum, we talked about at the beginning, as a second declension accusative singular, it means the sky. And terram, a first declension rather, accusative singular, the earth. In the beginning created, so literally translated, in the beginning created God, the sky and the earth. But we can sort of fiddle around with that a little bit. We could also theoretically translate it in different ways because our word order is squiggly. But so we see now how a word ending tells us what role it's playing in the sentence. We get to see those little Lego hats in action here. We see them. Oh, this is the second one. This has clauses. That's why it's color coded. But we've seen all of these pieces before, even if the vocabulary is different. We have the same prepositional phrase, rather, in principio. We have a different verb here. This is erat. Erat, it's third person again. It's singular. It's active and indicative, but it's imperfect. And it means was. By and large, regardless of what language you study, as long as there's sort of conjugation going on, the verb to be is one of the most irregular verbs in languages because it's used so frequently. It still has its own pattern. It just looks a little bit different than other verbs. So in the beginning, yes.
But in Italian, if you said era, it would mean they were, or she was, he was, that kind of thing. So it makes sense to me. In the beginning, was. In the past.
Yep.
The word.
Exactly. In the beginning was the word. In this case, because it's not perfect, it's not the word was and that's finished. The word is, it existed habitually ongoing. It didn't stop. So that's why we have it here as an imperfect. In the beginning was the word. That word, it's nominative, it's the subject. And I do just want to point out a word that was in the last phrase here, and we'll see a couple more times, or we've seen once, we will see again. That is the word et. Et means and. Latin, incidentally, is one of the only languages I can think of that has multiple ways to say and. Et is one of the most common, and if any of you are familiar with the ampersand, so that little and symbol, that is actually just a stylized way of writing et. Because hello, my name is Fortunata, and I'm full of really useless fun facts. So in the beginning was the word, and verbum, same form, same second declension, nominative singular, and the word, erat again was, apud Deum. This is another prepositional phrase. So we've seen the word Deus before. This is the accusative form because the word apud, which means essentially to dwell with or be with, always takes the accusative. And the word was with God. In this case, God is in the accusative because it's part of the prepositional phrase. And you notice I have no information for the red highlighting because we've seen all of these words and their forms before. And was, Deus, and verbum. And the word was God, or you could also translate it as, and God was the word, because they're saying these things are equivalent. But so is it starting to make sense how you basically can slot these different, and it's, to sum it up, Latin is essentially that like magnetic poetry where you have a base form and then endings, and then you can sort of smush them about to create meaning. Is that starting to make sense?
Yes, except that I have to do a lot of memorization of all these forms.
That is a thing you do. A lot of times if you end up taking a formal Latin class, people will throw in different mnemonics. One of the first ones I learned to remember first and second declension noun patterns is to the tune of row, row, row your boat. And I learned that in 2002 and have yet to forget it. So there are plenty of mnemonics out there. And for people who like memorization, great. If you don't, there are always like tables that exist online and in print. And so, okay, so suppose you want to continue studying Latin. Cool, I would love that. You are always free to email me, ping me on Facebook or what have you. If you want some books that will teach you formally, Wheelock's Latin is probably one of the most commonly used in collegiate Latin courses for college age beginners. I personally am also very, very fond of the Cambridge Latin course, which is actually aimed towards like middle and high schoolers in terms of how the information is presented. But it comes with a lot of really interesting cultural information alongside. So I quite like the Cambridge Latin course. For dictionaries, the pocket Oxford Latin Dictionary, you don't want the full Oxford Latin Dictionary because that's like 3 or 4 big thick volumes with etymology and things, but I would dearly love a copy. But the pocket Oxford Latin, the Bantam New College Latin Dictionary, or as I showed before, latin-dictionary.net/search. That's really cool because you can search by Latin word or English word. So if you see a Latin word and you don't necessarily recognize it, you can start typing it into the search bar in latin-dictionary.net and it will pull up the best matches. Then you can find which one you're looking for. And you can also do that with English if you're doing translation from English into Latin. If you're like, I don't remember how to say archer. Okay, let's look it up. If you're looking for texts themselves, in print, there's the Loeb Classical Library. Loeb Classical Library books come in 2 colors. They come in green and sort of like this orangey red color. Green books are Greek. You don't need the green ones. You just want the orangey red ones, which are Latin texts. You also have the Perseus Digital Library, which I said is run through Tufts University. And there's also Lacus Curtius, which is an online resource for Latin texts that is run through the University of Chicago. And Lacus Curtius has some texts that Perseus doesn't and vice versa. So depending on what you're looking for, you may want to try both of those if you're looking for a text online in Latin. And I have some videos because I will be giving you a copy of this presentation as a handout. You can actually go through and click these links. The first two, How We Know What Latin Sounded Like and the Latin Grammar playlist, are both put out by the same person. Is by a linguist who uses the moniker native lang. The first video is like how we understand and how we have learned what Latin is supposed to sound like, classical Latin specifically. His Latin grammar playlist will also go into some of the differences between classical and medieval Latin. So a student who is interested in that would almost certainly find it very interesting. And then the last one on here is a gentleman who I would love to meet. He has multiple channels. This one in particular is called Scorpio Martianus, and I include him because the guy who runs it, Luke Ranieri, is a really big proponent of living Latin, of using Latin as an actual spoken language and not just as a scholarly on paper language. To that, he has done multiple things like translated and performed Disney songs in Latin. He's done Under the Sea from Little Mermaid. He's done What's This from The Nightmare Before Christmas. He did You're Welcome from Moana. And one of the ones that I really like that he did a version of Hellfire from the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but specifically in ecclesiastical Latin. So it has some of those pronunciation differences that I was talking about earlier, because ecclesiastical Latin is derived from medieval vulgar pronunciation. He's very cool. He's also done things like adopted a kitten and talked about the anatomy of a kitten in Latin. And it's a neat way to engage with the language. I cannot recommend his stuff enough. But that is the end of the presentation itself. Let me pull up the link so I can share that with you. Have other questions, comments, concerns, what have you. Feel free to toss them my way. There is in the chat, there's the link to this presentation. You are welcome to peruse it at your leisure and share it. Within that, there is my SCA email address. If you want to continue to chat about Latin or ask more questions, or you're like, hey, this person I know has a Roman persona and they're getting an award and I would love for them to, or I think it would be great if their scroll was in Latin, 100% feel free to pass it my way. I will happily translate it for you. I do it for my own kingdom. I've done it for a couple of other folks outside of my own kingdom. I actually did a translation for a gentleman from Untier a couple of years ago. I am happy to continue to talk Latin at people and what have you, like 100%. Because it just brings me so much joy.
Well, I'm going to message you because I do have some questions about, I am collecting women's names from places not Venice, Florence, or Rome. We have a lot of that, but not other places. And some of these are recorded in such a way that I have questions about the spellings. Like I think some of them are in the genitive. Mm-hmm. And I want to make sure I'm recommending the proper name to be registered and not the wrong form.
Sure.
And then there's other things that are in the records because they're notary records. And so it's like Domina, Margarita, Filia, and it'll name her father, or it'll say Uxar and it'll name her husband. And it might even have like the profession of the father or the husband too. So I mean, for someone else, this might be a great data set to go even further than just names, but I really would love someone to give me a little assistance in making sure I have it right with the names.
Absolutely. I would be more than happy to help with that.
Awesome.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
But
I'm
In
gonna
the
s-
apparent absence of other questions, unless that was a question that I just interrupted.
No, I was just wondering if you're done with your presentation. I'll stop recording.
I am done with my presentation.